Good morning and welcome to another sutta study session here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So welcome to everyone who's joining in. So hello to Michael, Gita, Denise, Sarah, Kauser friend, and whoever else is watching. I'm happy to have all of you with us this morning. So as usual, I'll read through a sutta and give some explanations. Then at the end, I'll answer any questions that you have. So please feel free to type in questions at any time and I'll go through them at the end. And hello to Ishan. Good morning. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So today we'll be looking at a very important discourse today and tomorrow, two discourses that go together. So two discourses which are best understood in conjunction with each other. And these two suttas are particularly important because they are often taken as being evidence to support the viewpoint which some people have, that not everything we experience is the result of karma. However, it's important to first off recognize that any sutta must be taken in the context of all the other suttas. So no sutta stands on its own. And second, to look more closely at what the Buddha is actually trying to say in any particular discourse. So both of these discourses on closer examination are not supporting the idea that there are things which are not the result of karma. And also given that everything else in the suttas clearly indicates that karma is the essential mechanism which determines everything we experience, then similarly, it's not quite reasonable to then interpret the meaning of this sutta to be saying something contrary to that. But even setting that aside, a closer examination of these suttas makes it quite clear that the Buddha is not rejecting the universal applicability of karma in any way, as will become clear as we go through the sutta today and also the sutta tomorrow. So the sutta today is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 36, sutta number 21, the Sivaka sutta, so the discourse to Sivaka. So I'll go ahead and start reading through the discourse and give some explanations. So the sutta begins. On one occasion, the fortunate one was living at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove at the squirrels' feeding area. Then the wanderer Molya Sivaka approached the fortunate one and exchanged pleasantries with him. When the appropriate pleasantries were finished, Molya Sivaka sat to one side and said to the fortunate one, Sir Gautama, there are some contemplatives and priests who teach this, who believe this. Everything a person experiences, whether pleasant, painful, or neutral, is entirely predetermined. What does Sir Gautama say about this? So this is the opening for this sutta. So introducing the topic of it. So here we have a non-Buddhist spiritual practitioner of some kind, so Molya Sivaka, who tells the Buddha, well, some people claim that everything we feel is predetermined. So the Pali word that's translated here as predetermined is pubbe kata hetu, which means literally pre-made cause. Again, taking this same statement in the sutta we'll look at tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll be looking at the Titayatana Sutta, so in Guttara Nikaya 3.62, the Buddha actually mentions this viewpoint that everything a person experiences, pleasant, painful, or neutral, is entirely predetermined. He mentions that viewpoint, and in the sutta we'll look at tomorrow, the problem the Buddha points out with that viewpoint is that then it leads to people believing that there's no such thing as free will. The problem with that viewpoint is that it's essentially a rejection of free will. It's a statement that we're simply observers of our life rather than participants, that we have no control, no power, no influence over anything that happens to us. So given that the Buddha clearly defines this viewpoint in tomorrow's sutta in that way, we should understand it the same way in today's sutta. So this is someone who's asking, well, what does the Buddha feel about the doctrine of pre-determinism? This viewpoint that some people have that free will is an illusion, that we have absolutely no ability to make choices which shape and determine what sort of experiences we have, whether we have experiences that are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So the Buddha then answers Mulya Sivaka's question. And he answers it in, he gives several different answers to it. So I'll go through these answers. First he says, Sivaka, some feelings arise from excess bile. Sivaka, it can be personally known that some feelings arise from bile, and the world also agrees that it is true that some feelings arise from excess bile. In this case, Sivaka, those contemplatives and priests who teach and believe that everything a person experiences, whether pleasant, painful, or neutral, is entirely predetermined, neglect what they have personally known as well as what the world agrees is true. Therefore, I say that it is wrong of those contemplatives and Brahmins. So in this first case, he's giving the example of a medical disorder. So the Buddha is saying sometimes the feelings of experience are caused by medical disorders. And the same goes with the next few. So then he gives some more examples. He says, some feelings arise from excess phlegm, excess wind, or a combination of the above. So these first four examples he gives are all related to medical disorders, some kind of problem with the body. So the Buddha is saying when the balance of internal factors of the body shifts and changes, then that can produce sensations which might be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So here he's pointing to undeniable aspects of causality. And for each one of these, he gives the same statement. These are things that can be personally known. If we pay attention to our own experience, then we can see that when we have too much phlegm, for example, which might happen in the springtime when your allergies start getting out of control, or if you're in a dusty room, or if you eat certain kinds of food, then your body produces a lot of phlegm. And that produces sensations which might be unpleasant. So these are all cases where, again, one can clearly see that there's a cause, there's a condition for the sensation to arise. It's not happening randomly. And the Buddha also points out, and also this is something the world generally agrees is true. And this is interesting because the Buddha doesn't normally go by majority opinion as a backup for his statements. And in fact, there's other suttas where the Buddha flatly rejects majority opinion as a basis for belief in anything. A good example of this is in his argument with, what's his name? Chula Sachika. That's right, the philosopher Sachika, in the Chula Sachika Sutta, where Sachika at one point tries to back up his viewpoints by claiming, well, this is what most people believe. And the Buddha says, well, who cares what most people believe? I'm asking what you believe. But here the Buddha does go both on personal experience and also on popular opinion, in pointing out that this is a pretty standard experience that people have. It's something that's easily recognizable by the vast majority of people. And one reason I think he's doing this is that he's talking to someone who's not Buddhist, somebody who lacks faith in the Buddha, someone who's curious and interested, which is why he came and asked a question of the Buddha, but who doesn't have faith yet in the Buddha. So the Buddha is saying, like, look, this isn't just something that I teach. It's something that can be personally known, and it's something which pretty much everybody in the world personally knows. So again, the first four cases have to do with medical conditions. So disorders or imbalances of bodily factors leading to pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations. The next one he gives is change of season. So shifts in the weather. So when it starts getting hot or cold, or if there's a sudden change in air pressure. So many people get odd sensations in their body the day before a rainstorm happens, for example. And of course, too much humidity or not enough humidity, or there's all kinds of weather conditions or climate-based conditions which can generate sensations, which are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So here again, the Buddha is pointing to causality as something which we can clearly observe. Next, he talks about improper sustenance. So the Pali word here is visama parihara, which is a little bit of an unusual term. This is not a term that we commonly see in the suttas. So visama can mean uneven or imbalanced or improper, or sometimes it has the meaning of morally bad, but I don't think that's what it means here. And parihara means what sustains you, what keeps you going. So the most straightforward understanding here is he's talking about food. So if you're not eating correctly, maybe you're eating too little or too much, or you're eating unhealthy things, then that can produce sensations. And in fact, even if you're eating a perfectly healthy, balanced diet, that will also produce sensations. It's just those sensations might be pleasant or neutral rather than unpleasant. So here again, he's pointing to observable causality, but here he's also starting to get into the function of personal choice. So we choose what we eat. We choose how we eat within the limits of the conditions that we have. So here the Buddha is starting to point to the fact that this isn't just some random, uncontrollable medical event happening in your body, but rather it's something that's arising because of choices that we are making. We're choosing what to eat, and therefore that can affect what kind of sensations we experience through the body. And the next one, similarly, is over-exertion. So he's saying over-exertion can also produce sensations in the body. So if you push yourself too hard, you stay up too late, you work too hard, you exercise too much or not enough. These are all things which can push yourself beyond your limits. Or you spend 16 hours a day engaging in mental labor. That can also be a form of overexertion. So here again, the Buddha is emphasizing that these are choices we make which create corresponding effects, corresponding results, which might be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So it creates sensations based upon what we've done. And finally, the Buddha says also the result of karma. So he says, and with all the other ones, he says it can be personally known that some feelings arise as a result of karma. And the world also agrees that it's true that some feelings arise as a result of karma. So here the Buddha is coming down finally to one of the critical key points, which is that ultimately what we're experiencing is the product of choices we've made in the past. So karma, again, means action. So it's some kind of action we've chosen to do at some point in the past. So it's interesting to note here that the sequence the Buddha is giving, he's starting from things which people can claim are more or less outside of their control, such as illness arising in the body or changes in the weather. And then he proceeds through things which are more clearly things which are directly the result of our own choices. And then finally he comes to karma. He finally comes to karma, and he points out that we can actually personally know that sensations we're experiencing are the result of our own past karma, or the result of things we've experienced in the past. And also when we look more closely at the previous ones, so things like medical conditions. Here again, it's important to look at other suttas for the sake of context. So in the Chulakamma Sutta, for example, the Buddha clearly states that illnesses and physical afflictions are the direct result of having hurt other people in past lives. If we hurt other people, then in future lives we'll have a lot of health problems. And therefore, health problems are the result of having harmed other people in past lives. So this also gives some clarity here. When the Buddha is talking about even these first few medical disorders, it's still the result of karma. Similarly, unstable weather or harm arising from changes in climate and season also, again, is the result of karma from past lives. It's karma from past lives that determines what world we're born in, what regions of that world that we arise in, what weather conditions and patterns are present in the worlds that we appear. So here again, the Buddha is pointing back to karma, the result of our own karma. As for food, so again, in many suttas, the Buddha points out that the kind of food that we have access to, the quantity of food we have access to, how healthy it is, how nutritious it is also directly the result of karma from past lives. So this is also something that arises in countless suttas, where the Buddha points this out, that the access to nutritious and sustaining food is the result of karma from past lives. So ultimately, we recognize that every single thing in this list is talking about karma. So it's not, again, this is not a teaching which can be used as a rejection of karma, because every single answer the Buddha gives, beginning with the implicit, moving on to the explicit, is ultimately pointing back to past karma as being the foundation for what we experience. But the important thing, again, here is to recognize that the Buddha is ultimately always pointing to our capacity to make choices which bring about corresponding results. Ultimately, he's always encouraging us to take responsibility for the decisions that we make in each moment, and to make decisions which are wholesome, which are in line with Dhamma, decisions which are productive of good karma, and which contribute to serenity and insight. Which again is why it's important to take this sutta in conjunction with the sutta we'll look at tomorrow. So Anguttara Nikaya 3.62, Titayatana Sutta. Because there clearly the Buddha is also pointing out that one needs to be careful not to reject free will, not to reject the idea that we have the ability to make karmically potent decisions. So then the sutta wraps up. When this was said, the wanderer Molya Sivaka said to the fortunate one, "Excellent Sir Gautama, excellent Sir Gautama. Sir Gautama, just as one might set upright what had been overturned, or reveal what had been hidden, or explain the path to one who is confused, or bring an oil lamp into the dark so those with eyes can see. In the same way, the Dhamma has been revealed in many ways by Sir Gautama. I go to Sir Gautama for refuge, and to the Dhamma, and to the monastic Sangha. May Sir Gautama remember me as a lay devotee who has taken lifelong refuge from this day forth." So this is a fairly common statement that we see in the suttas when someone who is not Buddhist receives a very powerful teaching from the Buddha that finally convinces them that the Buddha is enlightened and that Buddhism is the right path to awakening. But then they commonly will make this statement, the statement of like, oh, it's as though you've set upright what had been overturned, or revealed what had been hidden, and so on. And then they either take the three refuges and become a lay disciple, or they request ordination, depending on the sutta. So in this sutta, the person takes refuge as a lay person. And then finally, the sutta ends with a very short verse, which is just listing the causes. And this short verse was probably a later addition to the sutta. In fact, its origin is uncertain. So many suttas, when the Pali Canon was compiled, there were included these very short memorization aids. So these very short verses at the end, which were meant to reiterate the key points or the key objects in list, so that it was easier for one to memorize the sutta. And if you forget something, then you recite the memorization aid at the end, and it might jog your memory as to what part of the sutta you've forgotten. So that's what we see at the end. There's just a list of the 8 qualities the Buddha mentioned. So bile, phlegm, wind, a combination, the seasons, impropriety, and over-exertion, with the result of karma as the 8th. Those are the 8 things he listed. So that's the end of this sutta. There's not really anything else I want to say about this. I think it's pretty straightforward. So at this time, if there's any questions, I'll go ahead and answer some questions. So we have Shadow of Labels says, "I love free will." So do I, because that's how we attain enlightenment. If there was no free will, then what do? You just wait forever and hope something magically happens eventually. And that's pretty depressing. And actually, there were some spiritual teachers at the time of the Buddha who taught that free will was an illusion, and that if you just waited, then eventually, randomly, chaotically, for no reason whatsoever, just out of the blue, enlightenment might happen to you. There were some teachers who taught that. And the Buddha utterly rejected this. He said that if you hold that viewpoint, you will never attain enlightenment. It's impossible. So Unknown asks, the Buddha said, monks in seclusion is nirvana gained. How much should we read into this? That Buddha quote sounds a little bit suspect to me. So if you could provide a sutta quote and we can see the context for that statement. So it can be quite dangerous to take sutta quotes entirely out of context. So it's always important to see what context a quote is from. And I could take a few stabs at the possible meaning of that, but it mostly centers around the word seclusion, which is viveka in Pali. The Buddha gives several layers of meaning to the word viveka, or seclusion. So the surface level is physical seclusion, which means just being by yourself. But he also says that viveka is to isolate the mind from defilement, or to isolate the mind from delusion. In which case, seclusion then is taken as a synonym for enlightenment. So secluding the mind from defilements. This is also the same word that the Buddha uses when he talks about jhana. You isolate the mind from unwholesome activities, and it's much easier to enter deep samadhi. That's a form of temporary isolation, temporary seclusion. Whereas when one attains awakening, then one permanently isolates the mind from defilement. Then Denise asks, how is the idea that something is predetermined to be understood? A higher being determines what happens, or universal law determines what happens, etc. Actually, we'll go over that in more detail tomorrow. So the sutta tomorrow is talking about these ideas of a higher being determining what happens. But briefly speaking, the Buddha, when he talks about predeterminism, he's talking about the belief that our choices don't matter, because everything that's going to happen to us is set in stone. It's unchangeable. It's immutable. Nothing we do will change anything that's going to happen to us in the future. That's the viewpoint that he's rejecting in both this sutta and tomorrow's sutta. And a higher being making all the decisions about what happens to us is one of the viewpoints that he rejects in the sutta tomorrow. So next one, Gita asks, Bhante, don't we bring habit energy from our past? Yes, we do. Yep. That's one of the results of karma, is that the habits that we've built up in the past will be strong in the present. And that means that in the present, we want to build up wholesome habits while trying to weaken unwholesome habits. Then she asks, do we need then to change our ways towards the Noble Eightfold Path in developing all wholesome states of mind? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in every moment, try to develop wholesome states of mind and try to avoid strengthening unwholesome states of mind. If at a bare minimum, try to reduce the intensity and frequency of unwholesome activities. So some people find the idea of completely stopping all unwholesome conduct a bit unrealistic. So if that's the case, then work on reduction, harm reduction, gradual decrease. So for example, someone who's trying to quit smoking, if somebody smokes 20 cigarettes a day, then commonly the advice is, well, tomorrow smoke 19. And maybe next week smoke 18. And the week after that, go down to 17. So gradual reduction over time can often be a more effective long-term strategy. So we also need to be realistic about our limits and capabilities. If we push ourselves too far too quickly, then we might get disheartened, which is not beneficial. But we want to always have that goal of strengthening the wholesome and diminishing the unwholesome. Then Maitreya asks, is there such a thing as group karma? I have to say I've always been a little bit puzzled by this term group karma. I've never really understood what people mean by that. And I can give two answers from a Buddhist perspective, which on the surface seem to be mutually contradictory, but actually they're just different ways of saying the same thing. One is that everything is individual karma, that the appearance of group karma is an illusion caused by the confluence of many different individual karmas. Another viewpoint is that since there ultimately are no such thing as individuals, no such thing as separate beings, then that means all karma is by definition a group karma, because there are no individuals. So you could either then say it's all individual karma, or it's all group karma, because there are no individuals. Or you could say it's both, or you could say it's neither. But really, ultimately, we're just talking about karma. We're talking about causality based upon choice. That's what we're talking about. Then Sarah asks, is it skillful to identify significant consequences of karma in our daily experience? Or just accept the unfortunate things that can happen and carry on doing our best? In terms of making choices, yeah, it's definitely beneficial. Consider the karma of what you're doing. Because every single choice that we make has long-lasting, far-reaching consequences. So even things that seem relatively minor are still producing karma. So we always want to consider the potential karmic consequences of what we're doing, and recognize that we will ultimately inherit the results. So we want to always do things which are beneficial, because we're going to be receiving the effects of that. And we want to avoid doing things that are harmful, because we would be receiving the effects of that as well. So yeah, closely watching your mind in every moment, and always considering what are the potential karmic consequences of the choices I'm making. So that's the end of the questions. So if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and wrap up there. So I think that might be it for this morning. Again, tomorrow morning we'll be looking at a sutta on a similar topic. So if you have further questions, that would be a time to bring them up. So we'll go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And you can join in this evening at 7:30 for meditation and Dhamma talk. And again, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for sutta study. See you next time.